Unless you've been living under a rock, there's a pretty good chance you've heard about Chat GPT and how amazing it is. I'm also sure you've probably heard people saying that it's going to take certain people's jobs, like mine, a software developer. Well, in order for Chat GPT to be able to take my job, it has to be able to do my job. And so that's what I want to test today. I want to see if Chat GPT can write all the code that I used for my last YouTube video, which was a video about running a Blazor Web Assembly application inside of Docker. And while this isn't a super complicated development task, it is something that I think that ChatGPT might struggle with just a little bit. And that's because ChatGPT only has knowledge from before September of 2021. And Blazor is a fairly new technology coming out in 2018. And I also chose this task because this is something that I do in my day-to-day job. I have a 9-to-5 job where I'm a software developer, and we have production applications that are running in Blazor Web Assembly in Google Cloud, which run off of Docker. Let's put ChatGPT to the test. Can it write this code and put me out of a job? Let's find out. I've started a brand new conversation with ChatGPT. I am using GPT+, which gives me access to GPT-4, which is their newest model. And I'm going to give it a prompt that hopefully will give us something that at least is workable. I haven't actually tried this yet to see how this is going to work. I have a feeling that I'm going to have to kind of push it in the right direction to give us the answers that we need. So let's see how it starts out. I said, I'm writing a Blazor Web Assembly application in .NET 6. I need to be able to run this application in Docker. I already have an empty Blazor Wasm app. Can you show me how to make it run in a Docker container? So let's see what this gives us. Okay, here's what it gave me. It says, here's your step-by-step guide to help you with the process. Step 1, install Docker. I already have that installed, but it actually did give a correct website to go to. Create a new file called Dockerfile without a file extension. And then add the following content to your Docker file. This content uses a multi-stage build to minimize the final image size, which is a very good thing. So that's very cool. So let's go ahead and do that. Over here, I have a brand new Blazor application. I'm going to switch this to file system, and I'm going to add a new file called Dockerfile. Now let's quickly take a look at this Docker file and just make sure that it looks like it's correct. First, it says from the Microsoft.NET SDK version 6 as build, which is correct. We do want version 6. Set the working directory to source, copy over everything, run a .NET restore, and then run a .NET publish in the release configuration and output to the folder called app. And do not restore because we just did that. This stage of the Docker file does look correct. There's a couple things that we could change to make this a little bit better, but I do believe this is going to work. And then the second stage is runtime. So from Nginx Alpine, set the working directory to var www.web, and then copy from the build stage, which is this one up here, copy app www root to the current folder. Well, let's just go ahead and copy this in and see what it does. Head back into my Docker file. I will paste all of that in there. Back over to ChatGPT. It also tells us to create the Nginx config file. So it says create an Nginx configuration file in the project root, create a new file named Nginx config and add the following contents. So I'm going to copy that code. I will say add a new file. This is nginx.conf, and I'm going to paste all of that in there. And so just a quick look at this. This does look like it's correct. It's making sure to set the types to WebAssembly, which is good. It's going to listen on port 80, which I believe is the same port exposed in the Docker file. It's setting the root to be var www web. And so let's take a quick look in the Docker file, var www web. That is correct. Then it says try files for the current URI or a folder called URI, and then it's going to default to index, and if it can't find any of those, it's going to give a 404. So this does look like it's correct and it should work. Now if we head back over to ChatGPT, it also gives us instructions on how to build the Docker image, which is great. And it says to build the Docker container in your project root, run the following command, replace image name with the name of your Docker image. So let's go do that. Go to JetBrains Writer. I'm just going to use the embedded terminal here. I'll paste in that command. I'll change the name to be Blazor Chat GPT, and let's build it. This image did finish building. I do want to try to run this and see if it works, but I want to go through this process as if I didn't really know what I was doing and then give that feedback to ChatGPT to see if it can fix the issue. So if I go back to ChatGPT, it also gave me the Docker run command. So let's go ahead and copy that. So I will go back to my terminal. I will paste that in there. The image name was Blazor Chat GPT. And for the container name, I'm just going to call it chat. And for the port number, I'll just use 5002. Everything else there looks correct, so let's run that. So it says that it started up, so let's go try this. Let's go to localhost 5002 and see what happens. And that does work. Now the second part of my video, I actually set it up so that the Docker container can be built differently for different environments, and it would serve the correct app settings file. If you're familiar with .NET, the newer versions all use appsettings.json files to set up different configuration variables. And I want to see if ChatGPT can do this so that if I say, hey, I want to build this for development, it'll build the development one and give me the development appsettings.json file. And if I build it for prod, it'll do the same thing but for prod. So let's go back into ChatGPT and I'll tell it what I want to do. All right, so here's my prompt for this. I said, that works, thank you. I always make sure that I thank ChatGPT just in case, AI takes over the world, that they think I'm one of the good guys. I also need to be able to serve the correct app settings JSON file depending on what environment I'm currently on. For example, the development environment should serve appsettings.development.json and production should serve appsettings.production.json. And then how can I do this? Says in your www root folder, add the correct JSON files like appsettings.development or production, and then modify a program, replace existing main, and then modify a program.cs, update it with the following main method. So it says load environment specific appsettings.json by using the host environment variable, and then setting that to the configuration. And it says modify your Docker file to pass in the environment variable, and then pass in the environment variable when you run the Docker container. So let's go ahead and plug this in and see if this works. In my program file, I went ahead and added in those lines. And then in my www root folder, I added in the appsettings.json files, one for development and one for production. And I'm going to make one more change. I'm not going to ask ChatGPT to do this. This is something I used in my last video. I want to just put a variable in those files, and then I want to show it on the index page just to make sure that this is actually working correctly. And here's that little bit of code that I added in. In my onInitialized function, I'm just setting a local variable called envname to the configuration of envname out of the app settings file. And then up here, I'm just displaying that name so that we can see it. And then in app settings dev and production, I have envname for dev and envname prod. So I made the changes to the program file. Let's also make the changes to the Docker file that it mentions. So I'll go ahead and copy this line here, and I'll go into my Docker file and replace that last line. Then lastly, we need to run the Docker container. But one interesting thing about this is that ChatGPT didn't say to rebuild the Docker container. And I know that we need to do that because we've made changes to the Docker file. And so if we don't rebuild that image, that's not going to be correct. So ChatGPT forgot one thing in here. I'll go ahead and let that slide. I'm going to come in here and rebuild the image. So Docker build with the same tag. That build is complete. So let's go run the container. And it does tell you that you need to make a change to your Docker run command. It says you need to add this environment variable in here. So I'm just going to copy that, go back into Writer, go to my Docker run command, and I'm just going to paste this in here. Environment is development, and I'll run that, and it started up. Let's go back to our Blazor app and refresh the page, and it says an error has occurred. So I'm going to take a look at the dev tools here in Google Chrome. You can see it's throwing an exception. It says error file not found appsettings.production.json. And this does make sense. I knew this was going to fail because this isn't how you set the environment variables for a Blazor Web Assembly application. So I'm just going to go over the documentation and kind of show how this actually does work. If you want more details, I'll post a link to my video here. But in order to set the Blazor environment variables for WebAssembly, it's a little bit different than if it's a server app. And I think that's what ChatGPT was trying to do. It was trying to run it as if this were a server run application. And there's two ways that you do this in Blazor WebAssembly. One of them is by adding some changes to your script tag to explicitly start the application and then tell it which environment to use. And the other way is by setting this Blazor environment header. So I'm going to see if I can just give it the error and see if it can fix itself. Let's see what happens. I'm going to go back into our Chrome DevTools, and I'm just going to copy this whole entire error, tell ChatGPT this happened, and see what it does. Here's what I'm going to tell ChatGPT. I said, I got an error when running the application using your code from above. And I said, this is the error that was printed out in the Chrome DevTools. How can I fix it? And then I just pasted in the whole entire error. So let's see what ChatGPT says. Okay, here's a response from ChatGPT. It says, I apologize for the confusion. In Blazor Web Assembly, the app settings.json files are loaded as static files by the browser, and the default configuration provider throws an exception when it can't find the file. Modify the main method with the following. The only thing it's changing is it's adding this optional true here. And then it says, however, make sure you have the files in the www root folder, and then make sure they're being properly included in the build output. And ChatGPT still hasn't given us its right answer. It still thinks that it can set up the program file to look for the correct JSON file. And we know that that's not how it's supposed to work. And it did mention to go check and make sure that things are being put in the build output correctly. I don't think this is something you have to do for WebAssembly. So let's hop over really quick and just take a quick look. So if I look at the properties for the index file, this index file I know has to be included in the build output, but you can see here that the copied output directory, it says do not copy. So because of how Blazor is built, that doesn't need to be set on these files. For thoroughness, I'm going to throw this in there, see what it does. Back in the program file, in the add JSON file, I'm just going to add that optional true. So I'll go ahead and rebuild this and rerun it. I'm 99% sure that this will fix the error, but it won't actually work. It's not going to give us the correct file. So I'll rebuild that image, and then I'll rerun the container. I'll go back to Chrome and I will reload our page. And you can see now that it's running, and it actually says that the current environment is prod, which isn't correct because we passed in development as the environment variable. So back, I just want to show how my app settings files are set up. So in appsettings.json, just the plain one, it says the env name is none. In development, it says dev. And in production, it says prod. And so again here, this is the command that I use to run this. It should be using the development file, but it's not, it's using production. I'm actually not sure why this is showing production. Somehow this environment variable is being set to production and not dev or anything else. I would have expected this to default to just the plain appsettings.json file. So either way, this still isn't working. And this is something I kind of expected. I did expect that ChatGPT would struggle with this a little bit because Blazor Web Assembly has changed quite a bit in the last few years. You know, version 6 of .NET changed quite a few things. And rather than just going back and forth with ChatGPT telling it what's wrong, I want to go to the actual documentation page from Microsoft. I want to see if I can just copy the documentation that's relevant to this, give it to ChatGPT, and see if it knows what to do after that. I'm going to go back to this page about setting up the configuration, and I'm just going to copy these two entire sections and then give it to ChatGPT and just see what happens. I'm really curious to see what ChatGPT does here because this is the web config file that would be expected if this was running an IIS. And since we're not using IIS, we're using Nginx, I wonder if ChatGPT is smart enough to know what this is actually supposed to be. So I'm going to go back into ChatGPT, I'm going to tell it that that didn't work, and I'm going to tell it I went to the documentation from Microsoft, that this is what it said to do, how should I proceed? Here's the prompt that I'm going to give back to ChatGPT. I said, that didn't work. It is using a production environment even though I passed in development as the variable. And then I say I went to Microsoft's documentation page and below is an excerpt from the doc. How would I implement this in my app? And then I just pasted in all of that text from the documentation page. So I'm just going to pass this to ChatGPT and see what it says. Okay, it's finished with its response, so let's go take a look and see what it said. It says you can set the environment using the approach from Microsoft documentation you provided. Since you are using Nginx to serve your Blazor Web Assembly application, you'll need to set the Blazor environment header in the Nginx config file. So it knew that I was using Nginx and it knew that I didn't need to use the example that Microsoft gave me, so props to ChatGPT for that. It says let's update your Nginx config to include the Blazor environment header based on the environment variable passed to the Docker container. It says in this configuration we use the map directive to create a variable Blazor environment that maps to the value of HTTP Blazor environment header passed from the Docker container to either development or production. If the header is not set or has a different value, the environment defaults to production. Next, update your Docker file to pass in the ASP.NET Core environment variable to Nginx. And then lastly it says to update the www.root index file to include the following script before the closing body tag. And I know this still isn't quite correct. It's actually using both of the different options from Microsoft. So it's saying to set the environment header and also tell Blazor to start manually using the environment that you pass. And you don't have to do both of those. So if I were to do this, I'm pretty sure it's not going to work. But I do want to try what it said with the Nginx and the Docker build. That's different than how I've done it in the past. So I'm really curious to see if this works. I didn't know that you could pass variables into Nginx files. And so if this does work, then actually I did learn something from ChatGPT today. So let's see how this works. So first I'm going to take this map, I'm going to put that into Nginx. So right below types, I've added in that map. And then lastly, I need to add the header. So in location, I'll add the header for the Blazor environment. So -e, Blazor environment, ASP.NET Core environment. So I will save everything and I'll go rebuild the image and then I'll rerun the container and I'll make sure that I'm passing in the correct ASP.NET Core environment again. And then I'll rerun, and I am passing in ASP.NET Core environment for development. I'll go back to my app, and I'll refresh, Refreshed a few times, you can still see that it's saying prod even though I'm passing in development. And one thing I do want to double check is I want to look at the responses of all the files that we're requesting from Nginx and just make sure that that Blazor header is being added correctly. So if you choose any of these that are being returned back from Nginx, you can see it's adding in the Blazor environment header, but it's going to be production. So this is what I thought would happen. I didn't think that you could pass in variables to Nginx that way. I did just do a little bit of Googling while I was building, and it doesn't look like it really works that way. So I think this kind of shows that there's some things that Chat GPT just can't do, which means that as of right now, my job is still safe. I have a feeling that if I kept going and just kept prompting Chat GPT with what I found in Google and what I'm seeing here, that maybe eventually I'll get to the right thing. If your goal with Chat GPT is to use it to make your job more efficient, to me, this isn't more efficient than just going to Microsoft's documentation page, seeing what you need to do, and applying that yourself. However, this did kind of get us, going, and it got us started a little bit on how this would work. So I think it's still a good tool. I still think it's something that people can use. But if you were doing something where you didn't quite know exactly what was going on and you were trying to use ChatGPT to make it work for you, it might not work out that great for you. But let me know down below if you guys like this video. I've been thinking about doing some more videos like this using ChatGPT to see if it can build little bits and pieces of an app for me. So if you want to see more, let me know down below. If you liked the video, think about liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you later.